The wind cut across my face like broken glass as I stepped onto the porch, clutching the foil-covered casserole I had spent the morning preparing. My Buick's engine still ticked from the long drive, a tired old sound that echoed the years I had carried on my back. I was Patricia Williams, 74 years old, widowed for over a decade, and though my body ached with arthritis and my hair had turned silver, my heart still beat strong for the family that remained. Thanksgiving had always been sacred in my house, even after my husband Edward passed, but this year I was not hosting. My daughter Kendra had insisted she wanted to do it at her home. I had agreed, though deep down I carried unease, the kind that gnaws quietly at your ribs until it becomes pain. That unease turned into something sharper, something brutal the moment I saw him. My grandson Jordan was curled up on the concrete steps, knees drawn tight against his chest, arms wrapped around his thin frame. His coat was nothing but a flimsy nylon jacket, unzipped, his breath puffing white clouds into the frigid November air. His lips were cracked and tinted blue. The casserole nearly slipped from my arms as my heart lurched. "Jordan," I whispered, my voice trembling like the porch boards under my feet. His head jerked up, startled, and when his eyes met mine, there was no relief in them, only shame. "Grandma," he stammered, his teeth chattering so hard I could hear the clack from where I stood. "I'm not supposed to be inside." For a moment, the world tilted, the laughter and clinking silverware from within the house, colliding with the raw silence outside. Behind the door, through the thin glass, I could see shapes moving, shadows of adults raising glasses, children reaching for rolls, and the unmistakable aroma of roasted turkey and spiced pie drifting outward like a cruel taunt. Inside, warmth. Outside, my grandson freezing. "What do you mean you're not supposed to be inside?" I asked, setting the casserole down with a clang that rattled the foil. I bent, my knees aching, cupping his icy hands in mine. They were stiff, like Edward's hands had been at the funeral home, cold and fragile, and the memory sent a jolt of terror through me. Jordan looked down, avoiding my gaze, his shoulders trembling. "I spilled juice on the tablecloth," he whispered. "Raymond said I ruined Thanksgiving." He locked the door. "Mom said I had to listen." For a heartbeat, I could not breathe. Raymond. That man's name tasted bitter, poisonous on my tongue. My daughter's husband, a man who wore fine suits and smiled wide for the neighbors, but whose eyes were always sharp with contempt. I had never trusted him. Never, but I had hoped Kendra would see through him in time. And now, my grandson, my sweet Jordan, was paying the price for her silence. Fury rose hot in my chest, warring with fear. Edward's voice echoed in my mind, the memory of him at our own Thanksgiving table years ago. Family means showing up when it matters most. I had not driven 2 hours through snow-dusted highways, had not held my breath against the ache of loneliness for a decade, only to arrive and find my grandson exiled like trash. "Get up, baby," I murmured, pulling him toward me, my own frail body straining against his weight. He stumbled into my arms, shaking violently, his skin so cold it burned. "We're going inside." He shook his head wildly, panic flooding his eyes. "Grandma, no please, he'll be mad," he said. If I tried to go back in, his voice cracked, breaking into a sob he tried to swallow. I pressed his head against my chest, feeling his tears soak through my sweater. The door behind us swung open for a moment, spilling golden light across the porch. Laughter rolled out like music, and then the door clicked shut again, sealing us in the cold. My jaw tightened. This was not a mistake. This was not discipline. This was cruelty. And cruelty, no matter how it dressed itself, had no place in my family. "Listen to me, Jordan," I said firmly, though my own throat burned. "You are not staying out here one more second. I don't care what Raymond says. Tonight, your grandmother is here, and I promise you I will not let anyone hurt you again." His wide eyes searched mine as if to test whether I meant it. Then with a trembling nod, he leaned into me. And in that moment, I knew something irreversible had begun. I was not just a guest at Thanksgiving dinner anymore. I was about to become the storm that tore the silence apart. The casserole still sat forgotten on the porch rail, the foil crinkling in the wind, but my mind drifted back to that morning as I steadied Jordan against me. I had woken before dawn, my joints aching the way they always did in the cold, but I pushed through. Thanksgiving had been Edward's favorite holiday, and every year since his passing, I tried to honor him with his recipe for candied yams. He used to hum gospel tunes as he peeled sweet potatoes, his deep baritone filling our kitchen, his laughter rumbling whenever I pretended to complain about the sugar he heaped into the dish. "Patricia," he would say, tapping my hand with the wooden spoon. "Thanksgiving is the one day calories don't count." I had thought about him as I mashed those yams earlier, humming to myself the smell of cinnamon and nutmeg making me smile through my loneliness. For a brief moment, I had even convinced myself that this year would be different. When Kendra called 2 weeks ago, her voice had been unusually cheerful. "Mom let us host this year. Raymond's company gave him a bonus and we want to make it special." I hesitated. Tradition had always been at my house in the little dining room with the lace curtains Edward had picked out, but I did not want to seem ungrateful. "If you're sure," I had said, my voice soft. "Of course," she'd insisted. "We'll do the turkey, you just bring your yams. Jordan will love it." On the drive over, I had tried to swallow my unease. The Buick coughed along the highway heater, blowing lukewarm air, and on the radio, Bill Withers sang "Lean on Me." My hands tightened on the wheel, remembering Edward singing that same song to calm me when we buried my sister years ago. That man could find hope in ashes. For a moment, I let myself imagine he was still beside me, tapping the dashboard in rhythm, winking as if to say everything would be fine. I had stopped at a gas station halfway there, filling the tank and buying a small pack of gum. The young clerk had wished me happy Thanksgiving, and I had smiled, warmed by the simple kindness. Little things like that mattered when holidays sharpened loneliness. I imagined arriving at Kendra's, being welcomed with open arms, sitting at a long table while Jordan told me about school and basketball, and maybe, just maybe, feeling like a family again. But even then, a voice inside whispered doubts. The last time I visited, Raymond had barely looked up from his phone, only grunted when Jordan tried to show him a drawing. Kendra had scolded the boy instead, as if his father's indifference were his fault. I had driven home that evening with a knot in my chest, telling myself not to meddle. "They have their own way," I muttered, though Edward's voice in my head disagreed. He had always believed silence was as dangerous as cruelty. Still, this morning, I chose hope. I polished the Buick's dashboard, put on my best green sweater, the one Edward always said made my eyes shine. I told myself Kendra was trying, that she wanted to bridge the distance between us. I even rehearsed what I might say to Raymond, something polite, maybe a thank you for hosting. I was determined to swallow pride for the sake of peace. As the city gave way to neighborhoods, my stomach fluttered like it always did before family gatherings. I slowed in front of Kendra's house, admiring the neat wreath on the door, the smoke rising from the chimney. I thought perhaps today will be different. I could never have imagined that behind that decorated door, my grandson would be cast out like an unwanted dog. That the warmth I yearned for would be denied to him, that the casserole I had made with Edward's memory would not be a dish at a table, but a witness to cruelty. Jordan's body trembled in my arms, the shivers so violent it rattled through my bones. I ushered him down the steps and toward my Buick, the casserole, forgotten its foil, crinkling like an accusation behind us. The heater wheezed to life, blowing a weak breath of warmth as I settled him inside, wrapping my scarf around his neck. His skin was clammy, his nose red, but it was the look in his eyes that hollowed me out. There was a kind of practiced silence there, the silence of a child who had learned not to speak his truth. "Tell me, baby," I whispered, brushing his damp curls off his forehead. "How long have you been out there?" He bit his lip, eyes darting away. Since before dinner." I glanced at the dashboard clock. Nearly 2 hours. My chest constricted. 2 hours in this cold. He nodded, his small hands twisting the hem of his jacket. I spilled my drink. It went all over the tablecloth. "Uncle Raymond, he said I ruined everything." The name slid from his tongue like poison, and my jaw clenched. "And your mother?" Jordan hesitated, then whispered, "She told me to listen." I closed my eyes for a moment, the pain cutting deep. My daughter Kendra, my own flesh, had stood by while her son was banished into the freezing night. I pulled back, searching his arms, his neck. That was when I saw it, faint bruises blooming along his wrist, hidden under the cuff of his sleeve. I caught his arm gently, heart pounding. "Jordan, who did this?" He yanked his hand back, panic flashing in his eyes. "Grandma, please don't be mad. I don't want to get in more trouble." "Sweetheart, listen to me," I said, my voice trembling but firm. This isn't your fault. You hear me? Not one bit of this is your fault. Tears brimmed in his eyes, and his words came out in a rush, the dam finally breaking. Sometimes he hits me when I forget chores or when I don't answer fast enough. Sometimes he locks me in the basement. Last week, he didn't let me eat dinner for 2 days because I dropped a plate. His voice cracked. He says I have to toughen up. That's how a man learns. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles burned white. Edward's face flashed before me, the gentle way he used to guide our children, the patience in his eyes when Kendra cried over homework or when David scraped his knee. Toughen up, Edward used to say, means learning to love harder, not to hurt deeper. He would have never let this stand. Jordan's sobs tore through the cramped space, his small body folding in on itself. I reached over, pulling him close. Baby, listen to me. Your grandmother is here now. I won't let him touch you again. He shook his head, panic rising. You don't understand. If he sees me with you, he'll what? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Lay another hand on you, not while I'm alive. I could hear the faint hum of conversation from the house laughter carried by the wind. My daughter's voice mingled with Raymond's deeper timbre, the sounds of a happy family celebration while their child sat in my car, shivering like an orphan. The hypocrisy made bile rise in my throat. I thought of the last phone call I'd had with Kendra months ago. She had sounded tired, distracted. When I asked about Jordan, she sighed. Raymond's handling it. He's strict, but that's how boys grow strong. I had wanted to argue, to scream, but my voice had failed me then. I told myself not to interfere, that Kendra was an adult and I had to respect her choices. But seeing Jordan now frail and broken, I realized my silence had made me complicit. Grandma, he whispered, clutching my sleeve. Please don't fight him. He gets scary when he's mad. My heart broke, but fury surged beneath it. Jordan, I said firmly, tilting his chin so he had to meet my eyes. The only one who should be scared tonight is him. His eyes widened as if daring to believe me. For the first time, a spark flickered in the dark wells of his gaze. I reached into my purse, pulling out the small spiral notebook I always carried, the one Edward used to call my truth book. I pressed it into Jordan's hands. I want you to write everything down. Every time he hurt you, every time he made you feel afraid. Do it for me. Do it for your mama, even if she doesn't see it yet. And most of all, do it for yourself. He hesitated, then nodded slowly, clutching the notebook to his chest. I smoothed his hair back and kissed his forehead. You're not alone anymore, baby. Tonight we start telling the truth. And when the truth comes out, no one can bury it again. Outside, the laughter swelled, a mockery of the suffering they'd forced on this child. But in that Buick with the heater groaning and Jordan's small body pressed against mine, a fire ignited inside me that no winter wind could ever put out. The little spiral notebook I had pressed into Jordan's hands rested on his lap, unopened, his fingers trembling over its cover as if afraid of what it might hold. My heart ached to see him hesitate, but I knew that fear had been drilled into him by Raymond's iron hand. It's all right, I murmured, reaching over to squeeze his shoulder. You can show me later. For now, just stay warm. But something inside me refused to let it go. I needed to know the truth. I needed to see with my own eyes what this man had been doing. Slowly, Jordan flipped the notebook open and his handwriting spilled across the pages in uneven lines. The words were simple, but every sentence was a dagger. October 12th. Locked in the basement for leaving my shoes by the door. October 14th. No dinner. October 23. Got hit for dropping a glass. November 2nd. Stayed outside all night because I forgot to feed the dog. November 15th. Couldn't go to school. Too many bruises. My throat tightened, the words blurring as tears burned my eyes. He had documented it, every slight, every cruelty, like a prisoner, etching marks into stone. I flipped another page and froze. There was a shaky drawing of a small figure standing outside under star snowflakes falling around him. Next to it, in block letters, he had written, I'm invisible here. Invisible. That word struck me like a hammer to the chest. My grandson, my flesh and blood, had been made to believe he was nothing but a shadow in his own home. Jordan, I whispered, my voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me before? His lip quivered. I wanted to, Grandma. But every time you called Mom was right there, and Raymond listens to all our calls. He says I should never embarrass him by talking bad about him. I closed the notebook slowly, my hands shaking. Edward's voice echoed again in my head. Silence is as dangerous as cruelty. He had been right all along, and I had let my silence become a shield for Raymond's violence. Did anyone else see? I asked, my mind already calculating. Teachers, neighbors, friends, surely someone must have noticed. Jordan sniffled. My teacher asked once about the bruise on my arm. I told her I fell off my bike. She looked like she didn't believe me, but Raymond was there when I said it. He smiled the whole time. The image made bile rise in my throat, Raymond smug and polished, twisting the truth while my grandson covered for him. I leaned back, breathing hard, trying to control the fury boiling inside me. He can't hide this anymore, I muttered, half to myself, half to Edward's memory. The door of the house opened just then, light spilling onto the porch again. I ducked low in the Buick, pulling Jordan closer. It was Kendra carrying a tray of empty glasses to the kitchen. Her face looked tired, drawn. For a brief second, I thought about calling her name, showing her the notebook, forcing her to confront what her husband had done. But I saw the way her shoulders slumped, how her eyes darted nervously back into the dining room. Fear lived in her too, though she wrapped it in silence. I swallowed hard. Not yet, I thought. Not until the truth was undeniable. I turned back to Jordan. Baby, do you still have your phone? He shook his head. Raymond smashed it last month, said I didn't deserve one if I couldn't take care of things. My stomach churned. A 12-year-old boy stripped of even the smallest escape. All right, I said firmly, pulling my own phone from my purse. We're going to take pictures of these bruises. Every mark, every page in this notebook. And we're going to keep them safe. Do you understand? His eyes widened, uncertain, but he nodded. I snapped photo after photo, my hands trembling, but steady enough to capture the evidence. The bruises on his wrists, the faint discoloration on his shoulder when he tugged his jacket down. The notebook pages filled with confessions no child should ever have to write. Each click of the camera was a promise: you will be seen, you will be heard, you will no longer be invisible. When I finished, I looked into his eyes. This isn't just for me. It's for the people who can protect you. Sometimes love needs help, Jordan, and I'm not afraid to ask for it. He swallowed hard, tears sliding down his cheeks. Grandma, will they believe me? I cupped his face, my thumbs brushing the wetness from his skin. Baby, when we show them this, they won't be able not to believe you. And if they try to look away, I'll put this evidence in front of them until they can't ignore it. Do you hear me? Evidence never blinks. The heater groaned louder, fighting against the bitter cold, but inside that Buick I felt a different kind of fire burning, one that spread from my chest to my fingertips. I wasn't just a grandmother anymore. I was the keeper of the truth, and I had the proof in my hands. I thought of Edward, of the Thanksgiving dinners he once led with grace and laughter. I thought of the empty chair at my table these past years. Tonight, I would not let his legacy be tarnished by silence. Tonight, the truth would start its climb out of the shadows. I pulled Jordan close once more, my voice steady with resolve. You're safe with me now, and soon everyone will know what's been happening here. His small voice barely rose above a whisper, but it carried the weight of hope. Promise. Promise, I said the word sharp as steel. The camera roll on my phone glowed with images that made my stomach twist. But as I tucked the device back into my purse, another kind of memory surged forward, uninvited, clawing its way through the haze of rage. It was Thanksgiving 20 years ago in the little brick house Edward and I bought when we were newlyweds. The walls were chipped, the heating unreliable, but Edward always said love could warm a place better than any furnace. He had been right. I could still see it, as if the air in that cold Buick dissolved into the smoke of our old kitchen. The counters were cluttered with pots bubbling and pans sizzling, Edward moving through the chaos like a conductor of an orchestra. He wore his favorite flannel shirt sleeves rolled up, whistling some tune from church choir as he basted the turkey. Kendra, only a teenager then, leaned against the counter, rolling her eyes but smiling despite herself. Edward handed her a spoon, insisting she taste the cranberry sauce. She wrinkled her nose, but the way her eyes lit up told me she liked it. David, her younger brother, ran through the kitchen with a toy airplane, nearly knocking into me as I set pies on the windowsill. Slow down before you crash into dessert. I'd shouted, laughter bubbling through me. Edward scooped the boy up, spinning him in circles until the child shrieked with joy. The house rang with sound, pots clanging, children laughing, Edward's voice booming in song. It was messy, loud, imperfect, but it was ours. When we sat down at the table, Edward always took a moment before carving the turkey. He'd clear his throat, fold his hands, and say, "Family means showing up when it matters most." He had repeated it every year, as if carving it into our bones along with the bird. That phrase had become our covenant, something unspoken but binding. And now, 20 years later, that covenant was broken. My grandson, Edward's grandson, had been locked outside like a stray animal, invisible in the very home that should have embraced him. The memory shifted sharper now to the Thanksgiving right before Edward passed. His body had already grown weak from the cancer, but he insisted on sitting at the head of the table one last time. His voice had been faint but steady as he looked at Kendra and David, and then at tiny Jordan, just a toddler in his high chair. "This family will protect its children," he'd said, squeezing my hand. "Promise me, Pat, if I'm gone, you'll still fight for them." I had promised the words choking me then, and I felt them choke me again now. Somewhere between grief and survival, I had let that promise blur. I told myself that Kendra was grown, that it was her household, that I had no right to interfere. I told myself silence was respect, but silence had turned me into an accomplice. Edward would never have forgiven me for standing by. Jordan shifted beside me, tugging at the scarf I had wrapped around his neck. His cheeks were blotchy from crying, his eyes still glassy with fear. I stroked his hair, but in my mind, I saw Edward's hand instead, steady and sure. "You remind me of your grandpa," I whispered, my throat thick. Jordan looked up confused. He was strong baby, not because he was harsh, but because he knew how to love without fear. That's real strength. Don't let anyone tell you different. Jordan blinked his lashes damp, and for the first time since I'd arrived, a faint smile flickered across his lips. It was fragile like a candle flame in a storm, but it was there. The past and present collided then, the warm glow of Edward's memory against the harsh cold of reality. My husband's absence was a wound that never healed, but his words were still alive. They breathed through me, guiding me, reminding me that tonight wasn't about casseroles or tablecloths. Tonight was about keeping a promise. I inhaled deeply, letting the memory settle into resolve. The Buick heater rattled, Jordan leaned against my shoulder, and in that fragile silence, I heard Edward as clearly as if he were in the back seat. "Show up, fight for him, do not let fear win." And for the first time in years, I felt the grief sharpen into purpose. The longer I sat in that Buick with Jordan pressed against me, the more the weight of Edward's words bore down on my chest. I could almost feel his hand on my shoulder, steady urging. The evidence was in my purse, the bruises on my grandson's skin, the notebook with dates and punishments scrawled in a trembling hand. Silence had protected Raymond for too long. Tonight, silence would end. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The cold wind rushed in and Jordan clutched at my arm. "Grandma, no," he pleaded, his voice hoarse from crying. "Please don't go in. He'll get mad." He said if I ever embarrassed him again. I knelt in front of him, my fingers brushing his tear-streaked cheek. "Baby, I've lived 74 years on this earth. I've buried a husband, I've walked through grief that nearly swallowed me whole. Do you think for one second I'm afraid of a man like Raymond?" My voice steadied steel, sliding into it. "The only thing I fear is failing you. And that, Jordan, I will not do." He swallowed hard, nodding, though the tremor in his hands betrayed his fear. I kissed his forehead, then straightened my knees stiff but my back unyielding. I grabbed the casserole dish from the porch, not because I cared about the food anymore, but because I refused to leave behind a single part of myself. The front door swung open, easily unlocked from inside. Warmth enveloped me in a wave, the scent of roasted turkey and spiced pies pressing against me like mockery. Laughter tumbled through the dining room silverware, clinking against porcelain. And at the head of the table sat Raymond, carving the turkey with a flourish, his smile wide and false. Conversation faltered when I appeared in the doorway. Kendra's eyes widened, her hand tightening around her wine glass. "Mom, you're late," she stammered, forcing a smile. "We were just about to—" I set the casserole down on the sideboard with a sharp thud that silenced the room. "Where's Jordan?" I asked, though my voice carried more accusation than question. Raymond's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. "He's learning a lesson outside. Boys need discipline." My hands curled into fists. "Discipline." That child has bruises all over his body. He's been locked out in the freezing cold for hours. That's not discipline, Raymond. That's abuse. A murmur rippled around the table. Cousins and in-laws shifting uncomfortably. Some avoided my gaze. Others stared at Raymond as though waiting for him to explain away the accusation. Raymond chuckled, shaking his head. You always were dramatic, Patricia. Maybe if you'd been stricter with Kendra, she wouldn't have turned out so soft. I'm not going to let Jordan grow up weak. Kendra's face flushed torn between loyalty and shame. Mom, please don't make this harder, she whispered, her voice brittle. I turned on her, my heart breaking. Harder, Kendra, your son is freezing outside while you sit here drinking wine. You think this is hard? Try burying a child who was never protected. Is that what you want? Her lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time I saw the fracture in her silence. Raymond slammed the carving knife onto the table, making the china rattle. That's enough! This is my house, my rules, and if you don't like it, you can leave. The old fear tried to creep in, then the instinct to shrink back to avoid escalation. But Edward's voice rose louder in my mind. Show up! Fight for him! I pulled my phone from my purse, my thumb already pressing 911. The room froze. Raymond's face twisted, his voice a low growl. You wouldn't dare. I locked eyes with him, my voice steady as a blade. Watch me. The operator's voice crackled through the speaker almost instantly. 911, what is your emergency? I raised my voice so everyone in the room could hear, so there would be no more denial, no more silence. This is Patricia Williams. My 12-year-old grandson has been locked outside for hours in freezing weather. He has bruises from repeated beatings. The man responsible is in this house. His name is Raymond Brooks. I need officers and Child Protective Services here immediately. Gasps circled the table. Kendra covered her mouth, her glass shattering as it slipped from her hand. Raymond surged to his feet, but I lifted my chin, refusing to flinch. The operator asked for the address, and I gave it clear and deliberate while Raymond's glare bored into me. My heart pounded, but for the first time in years I felt powerful. Not because I was fearless, but because I chose to act despite the fear. When I hung up, the room was so silent I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. I slid my phone back into my purse, my eyes never leaving Raymond's. Help is on the way, and this time there's no hiding what you've done. The moment I ended the call, the dining room seemed to exhale, every sound sharper, every glance like a knife. Forks scraped against plates nervously, someone coughed, and the tick of the mantel clock thundered through the silence. Raymond's jaw tightened and he leaned forward, his palms flat on the table. The carving knife gleamed where he had slammed it down, a sinister reflection of the man himself. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, old woman. He spat, his voice low and venomous. You come into my house, accuse me in front of my family, humiliate me, and call the police. Do you have any idea what you've done? I squared my shoulders, the tremor in my knees be damned. Yes, Raymond, I answered evenly. I've finally done what I should have done months ago, protect Jordan. Kendra rose halfway from her chair, her hands trembling as she reached toward me. Mom, please don't make this worse. Raymond he just wants discipline. You know how boys can be. Discipline, I snapped, turning on her so fast she flinched. Discipline doesn't leave bruises. Discipline doesn't lock a child in a basement or abandon him in the freezing cold until his lips turn blue. Discipline is love wrapped in firmness. What Raymond does is cruelty dressed in authority. And you, Kendra, you've let it happen right under your roof. Her face crumpled, the facade of calm cracking. I didn't know it was that bad, she whispered, but her eyes slid toward Raymond as if begging him to confirm it. Raymond let out a bark of laughter, harsh and hollow. See? Even she doesn't believe you. You've always been dramatic, Patricia. You think because you buried a husband and raised 2 kids, you get to tell me how to run my home. Jordan needs to be toughened up, or the world will eat him alive. My hands shook, but my voice cut through the room like glass shattering. The world won't eat him alive, Raymond, you will. And I will not sit quietly while you chew him up and call it fatherhood. Gasps rippled among the relatives crowded at the table. One of the cousins lowered his fork, staring between us like he'd just realized the party he'd been enjoying was a masquerade ball over a battlefield. Raymond's eyes narrowed into slits. You think anyone's going to believe you over me? I'm a respected man. I have a job, a house, a reputation. You're just an old widow desperate for attention." The words stung, but only for a second. I thought of Edward, of his steady hand and steady voice. "Respect isn't what people say about you when you're smiling in a suit," I shot back. "Respect is what a child feels in your presence. And Jordan feels fear. Raymond. That's not respect, that's terror." Kendra pressed her palms to her temples, her voice breaking. "Stop, both of you. Please. This isn't helping." I turned to her, my tone softening, though my resolve did not. "Kendra, I know you're afraid of him. I see it in your eyes every time you look his way. But fear isn't love and silence isn't protection. You are his mother. You have the power to end this. Don't you dare hide behind excuses while your son suffers." Her lip trembled, tears threatening to spill, but still she said nothing. Her silence felt heavier than Raymond's rage. He stood suddenly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor, and pointed a finger at me. "You think you've won because you made a phone call? You don't know how this works. When the cops get here, I'll tell them you're senile, confused. I'll say, 'Jordan bruises himself to get attention.' Who do you think they'll believe? Me, the provider, or you, the bitter old woman?" The words sliced, but my hand slipped into my purse and closed over my phone. Calm spread through me like a tide rising. "They'll believe the photos," I said, pulling the phone free, my thumb sliding across the screen to reveal the gallery. The images glowed bruises, notebook pages. Jordan's handwriting. I'm invisible here. I raised the phone high enough for everyone to see. "They'll believe the evidence, and evidence doesn't lie, Raymond. Evidence never blinks." A gasp went up around the table. Even those who had been silent shifted uneasily, glancing at Raymond as though his mask had begun to slip. His face twisted, rage boiling in his eyes. "You think some bruises mean anything?" he sneered, though I heard the crack in his bravado. "Kids fall, kids lie, kids exaggerate. Kids don't lock themselves outside on Thanksgiving," I shot back. "Kids don't starve themselves for 2 days. Kids don't beat their own skin black and blue. Stop pretending your cruelty is their clumsiness." Raymond slammed his fist onto the table glasses, toppling wine spilling across the pristine tablecloth. Kendra let out a strangled sob. "Enough," she cried, her voice cracking. "I can't, please. I can't do this." I stepped closer, planting myself between Raymond and the rest of the family. My voice shook, but not from fear, from fury. "You don't scare me, Raymond. You've scared everyone else into silence, but not me. Tonight you're done." The sound of sirens wailed faintly in the distance, then growing louder, slicing through the tension like a blade. Raymond's eyes darted toward the window, panic flickering across his face for the first time. I crossed my arms, my voice steady and final. "Hear that, Raymond? That's the sound of truth coming for you. And this time, no smile, no lie, no threat will cover what you've done." The clock ticked, the sirens grew louder, and Raymond, once so smug, stood frozen at his own table as the walls of silence began to crack around him. The sirens grew louder until their wail filled the walls, and with a final screech of tires, red and blue lights spilled through the dining room windows. The chatter at the table collapsed into whispers, chairs scraping as people shifted uneasily. Raymond's swagger melted into something meaner, tighter panic simmering just beneath his skin. A heavy knock rattled the front door. "Bam, bam, bam, police, open up!" Kendra froze her wine glass, still trembling in her hand. Raymond looked around wildly as if searching for an escape hatch in his own home. Then, with a forced grin, he strode toward the door. "Stay put," he barked over his shoulder. "I'll handle this." I followed close behind, my heart thundering but my steps steady. He yanked open the door, and 2 officers stepped in their uniforms, crisp, their faces unreadable. Behind them stood a woman with a clipboard and a CPS badge hanging from her lanyard. Raymond Brooks, the taller officer, asked, his tone firm. "That's me," Raymond said smoothly, extending a hand. "There's been some kind of misunderstanding." Before he could spin his lie, I stepped forward, my voice slicing through the air. "Officers don't listen to him. My grandson Jordan has been locked outside for hours in freezing weather. He has bruises all over his body. And this man is responsible." Raymond's smile twisted into a sneer. "She's delusional. Old, confused. My stepson is just a troubled kid. He makes up stories for attention." The CPS worker raised her eyes from her clipboard, unimpressed. "Where is the child now?" I turned toward the door, motioning. "Jordan, sweetheart, come in." The Buick door creaked and Jordan stepped timidly into the porch light. His small frame looked even smaller in the oversized jacket, his face pale lips still tinged with blue from the cold. He hesitated, then shuffled inside his eyes, darting nervously between Raymond and the officers. The CPS worker crouched down to his level, her voice gentle. "Hi, Jordan. My name is Ms. Green. Can you tell me what happened tonight?" Jordan's eyes filled with tears, his voice breaking into the silence. He locked me outside. For hours. I was cold. I thought I was gonna freeze." He raised his sleeve, showing the purple bruises on his wrist. "He hits me all the time, and he tells me if I say anything, nobody will believe me." The room went still. Every cousin, every aunt, every distant relative at that table stared as the boy's words dropped like stones into water. Raymond lunged forward. "That's a lie," he roared. "You ungrateful little brat." "Enough," the officer barked, stepping between them. "Mr. Brooks, back up." Jordan flinched, shrinking against me. I wrapped an arm around his shoulders, glaring at Raymond with all the fury I had left in my bones. The CPS worker's pen scratched quickly across her notes. "Jordan has this happened before, being locked out, being hit." He nodded rapidly, his voice trembling but clear. "Yes. He makes me write it down sometimes, like punishments. I keep a notebook." My hand dove into my purse, pulling out the spiral notebook, the photos already saved on my phone. I handed them over without hesitation. "Everything is here. Dates, details, photographs. You don't have to take my word. The evidence speaks for itself." The officer flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. He turned to Raymond. "Mr. Brooks, you're under investigation for child endangerment and abuse. Please place your hands where I can see them." Raymond's face flushed a dangerous red. "This is insane! She's setting me up! You can't take my word over some kid's doodles and an old woman's accusations." The officer didn't blink. He pulled out a pair of cuffs, the metallic clink ringing through the room like a gavel. "Raymond Brooks, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the Miranda rights faded as gasps filled the dining room. Kendra sobbed into her hands, finally breaking her shoulders, shaking with the weight of her silence. Relatives murmured, some in shock, others with grim recognition, as though the truth had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. Jordan clutched my arm tighter as Raymond's name echoed through the house, called out, stripped bare. No longer hidden behind charm or authority. His name was no longer a mask. It was a record, an indictment, a truth the world could finally see. And for the first time that night, I felt the heavy air shift. Not into celebration, not yet, but into something sharper. Justice had spoken his name. The flashing lights eventually dimmed as the cruiser pulled away. Raymond's shouts muffled behind the glass and swallowed by the night. The house, once thick with the smell of turkey and pies, felt hollow, stripped bare of its illusions. Relatives slipped out quietly, coats clutched to their chests, unwilling to meet my eyes. Only Kendra remained collapsed at the end of the table, her face buried in her hands. I guided Jordan into the living room, settling him on the couch. He curled into the corner, blanket wrapped tight, exhaustion pulling at his small frame. For the first time since I'd arrived, his breathing slowed into something like peace. I smoothed his hair, watching him drift, then stood with the quiet fury of a woman who knew this battle had only just begun. The door clicked open again, and Ms. Green from CPS stepped inside, holding a stack of papers. "Mrs. Williams," she said softly, "we'll be placing Jordan in protective care until the investigation is complete. But if you're willing, given your relationship and stability, we'd like to consider you as his temporary guardian." I didn't even hesitate. "Yes, whatever it takes. He comes with me." Her eyes softened, a flicker of relief there. "Then we'll start the paperwork. I'll need some documentation and there will be hearings. It won't be easy." I straightened my shoulders. Nothing worth protecting ever is. After she left, I found myself in the kitchen, the mess of spilled wine and overturned glasses still staining the tablecloth. My hands shook as I reached for the phone, not out of fear, but determination. Edward's voice echoed again. "Show up. Fight for him." I scrolled through my contacts until I landed on a name I hadn't called in years, Denise Walker. Denise and I had sung in choir together back in the day, but life had carried us down different roads. She became an attorney, sharp and uncompromising. I remembered the last time we spoke her saying, half joking, "If you ever need someone to raise hell in a courtroom, Pat, you know where to find me." Tonight I was cashing in on that promise. The phone rang twice before her voice came on brisk but warm. Patricia Lord, it's been too long. Too long, I agreed, my throat thick. Denise, I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't urgent. My grandson, he's been abused. Locked outside tonight in the cold. The police have him now, but I need help. I need someone who won't let this get swept under the rug. There was no hesitation on her end. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about the bruises, the notebook, the photos, the years of silence. I told her about Raymond's arrogance, about Kendra's paralysis, about Jordan's trembling voice, finally naming the truth. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Denise spoke, her tone like steel wrapped in velvet. Patricia, you came to the right person. We'll file for emergency custody. We'll press charges and we'll make sure Jordan's voice is heard. Evidence doesn't lie, and you've got plenty. I exhaled, the weight in my chest easing just slightly. Thank you. I was afraid no one would believe us. They will, she promised, because we'll make them. I'll meet you first thing tomorrow morning. Bring the notebook, the photos, everything. When I hung up, the house was silent, but for the sound of Jordan's gentle breathing. I walked back into the living room, watching the boy sleep, his face finally peaceful. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine Edward standing in the doorway, arms crossed, pride shining in his eyes. That's it, Pat, he'd say. You're keeping the promise. I sat down beside Jordan, my hand resting lightly on his blanket. The fight ahead would be brutal, court dates, testimonies, whispers from family who would rather pretend nothing happened. But I wasn't the woman who stayed silent anymore. I had found my allies. I had found my purpose. And I would not stop until Jordan was safe, until the world knew his name, not as a victim, but as a boy who survived because someone finally chose to fight. The courthouse smelled of old wood and polish, a blend that carried weight and history. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped around Jordan's, both of us squeezed into suits borrowed from kind neighbors who wanted us to look like more than survivors. We needed to look like we belonged. Denise stood at the table ahead, her blazer sharp, her posture unyielding. She had warned me court was not a movie. It would be slow, ugly, filled with attempts to twist truth into doubt. But she also reminded me evidence never blinks. Raymond sat across the aisle, his wrists free now, but the arrogance clipped from his face. He wore a dark suit that hung slightly loose as though even fabric resisted clinging to him. Kendra sat behind him, her eyes red-rimmed, caught between guilt and something like fragile awakening. The judge entered, gavel cracking, once silencing the murmurs. Court is now in session. The people versus Raymond Brooks, charged with child endangerment, battery, and neglect. The prosecutor rose first, presenting the outline. A man entrusted with the care of his stepson had instead subjected him to cruelty that no child should endure. Locking him outside in freezing temperatures, repeated beatings, psychological threats. And then Denise rose, our champion, her voice low but cutting. This case is not about discipline, Your Honor. It is about domination disguised as care. It is about cruelty cloaked in authority. And it is about a boy 12 years old who had the courage to write down the truth when adults failed to speak it. She laid Jordan's notebook on the evidence table. Its spiral edges glinted under the courtroom lights, a humble object now carrying the weight of testimony. Page after page, his childish handwriting told of punishments, locked out for lying about homework. No dinner for spilling juice. Hit with belt for talking back. The jury leaned forward, some with their lips pressed tight, others with brows furrowed as the words of a child reached them directly. The defense attorney countered, his voice slick. Children exaggerate. Boys roughhouse, they bruise themselves. And Mrs. Williams here, he gestured toward me. She is elderly, emotional, and has made no secret of her dislike for Mr. Brooks. My stomach twisted, but Denise didn't flinch. She rose slowly, almost calmly. With respect, evidence will show that this is no exaggeration. She motioned for the clerk. On the screen appeared the photographs, Jordan's wrists ringed with purple, the faint outline of a shoe print across his rib cage. Gasps filled the room. I had to squeeze Jordan's hand tighter when his eyes dropped, shame creeping in where none belonged. Then came the moment Denise had prepared me for, Jordan taking the stand. His small body seemed swallowed by the chair, his feet not quite touching the floor. The bailiff swore him in, and for a moment his eyes darted to mine. I gave him a nod, my silent vow. I'm here. You're not alone. He spoke softly at first, telling how Raymond would lock him outside sometimes for hours. how meals were withheld as punishment, how bruises came not from clumsy accidents but from fists, belts, boots. His voice broke once, but then he pulled out the line Denise had rehearsed with him. Grandma told me evidence never blinks. So I wrote it all down because I knew one day somebody would have to listen. The courtroom hushed. The defense attorney shuffled his papers, his smooth confidence cracked. Raymond was called next. He swaggered at first, insisting it was all lies, that Jordan was manipulative, that I had poisoned the boy against him. But Denise was merciless. She pressed him with timelines that didn't add up with neighbors' testimony that they'd heard shouting with medical records showing untreated injuries. With every answer, his mask slipped further. At last, Denise leaned in, her voice razor sharp. "Mr. Brooks, are you telling this court that every photograph, every note, every bruise, every tear, and every neighbor who heard screams is lying while you alone speak truth?" Raymond sputtered, his face red, sweat collecting at his temples. "They're exaggerating. They're all exaggerating." Her eyes narrowed. "No, Mr. Brooks. The only exaggeration here is the lie you've built around your cruelty." The judge's gavel struck. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady. "We find the defendant Raymond Brooks guilty on all counts." A rush of air filled the room, a collective exhale of relief and disbelief. The judge's sentence followed swiftly: 8 years in state prison, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order forbidding contact with Jordan. I closed my eyes as Jordan gripped my hand tighter, not in fear this time, but in something brighter. Relief. Hope. Kendra sobbed openly behind us, her body shaking. I did not turn to comfort her, not yet. That was her journey to walk, her silence to answer for. My task was the boy beside me. As deputies led Raymond away, his name echoed through the chamber again. No longer a father figure, no longer untouchable. Just a man branded by truth, stripped of his power, shackled by justice. I whispered into Jordan's hair as he leaned against me. "It's over, baby. You're safe now." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The courthouse doors swung open and the cool afternoon air wrapped around us like a benediction. For a long moment, Jordan and I simply stood there on the stone steps, the clamor of reporters' questions echoing from below. Flashes popped, microphones thrust forward. But all I could hear was his small whisper. "It's really over, Grandma." I bent down, brushing the hair from his forehead. "It's over, sweetheart. He can't touch you again." Denise shielded us with her arm, guiding us past the chaos and into her car. "Don't answer them," she murmured. "You owe the world no explanations. You've already given the truth where it mattered." The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm of healing. Jordan moved into my house officially, his room set up with blankets Edward once kept in the cedar chest. He insisted on keeping the notebook, though CPS offered to archive it. "It reminds me that I wasn't crazy," he explained one night, his voice steady. "That what happened was real, but it's done now." School became a sanctuary. His teachers informed gently of what he had endured, watched over him like guardians. He found a counselor he trusted, a kind-eyed man who told him that bravery wasn't about never being scared. It was about speaking even when your voice shakes. And Kendra, my daughter, haunted the periphery. She called once, her voice thin over the line. "Mom, I don't know how to face him. Or myself. I should have protected him." I closed my eyes, pain piercing sharper than any gavel. "Then start now, Kendra. Show up. Not with excuses, but with change." For weeks, she didn't come. But one Saturday morning, Jordan found her waiting on the porch, clutching a teddy bear he hadn't seen since he was 6. Their embrace was tentative, broken, but it was a beginning. As for me, silence was no longer enough. At church, when a woman confided her neighbor's child might be suffering, I told her exactly what to do, who to call, which numbers to save. Word spread. By spring, I had opened the doors of the fellowship hall every Thursday night, a circle of folding chairs filled with grandparents, aunts, uncles, and even older siblings, anyone who had found themselves the only line of defense for a child. We called it Quiet Strength. Each week, stories poured out. A boy hidden in a garage during storms. A girl told her bruises were clumsy feet. Cousins neglected in silence because no one wanted to rock the boat. We cried, we prayed, and most importantly, we shared the steps that turned whispers into action. Evidence, phone calls, persistence. Jordan sometimes joined me sitting at the edge of the circle sketching in his notebook. One evening, as a new grandmother trembled, telling how her granddaughter flinched at every raised voice, Jordan lifted his head and said softly, "Evidence never blinks. I know because I wrote mine down. You can help her do the same." His words rippled through the room stronger than any sermon. Life was not suddenly perfect. Trauma does not vanish with a gavel strike. Nightmares still jolted Jordan awake. Guilt still shadowed Kendra's eyes. But every morning when Jordan ate breakfast at my table, when laughter returned to the small house Edward and I once filled with music, I felt the slow stitching of a wound, long left open. One evening, as spring light stretched across the yard, Jordan leaned against me on the porch swing. "Grandma," he said, "when I'm older I want to help kids too. Like you and Ms. Denise and Ms. Green did. So nobody feels invisible again." I wrapped an arm around him, eyes stinging. "Then you'll be living proof, baby. Proof that even in the coldest winter love can still break through." And as the sun dipped low, casting the world in gold, I knew we had not just survived, we had begun again. There are nights when the house is quiet, the kind of silence that used to feel heavy and accusing. Now it feels earned. I sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching Jordan sleep safely in his room, and I think of Edward. I imagine him leaning against the doorframe, arms folded, that proud smile tugging at his lips. "You did it, Pat," he would say. "You kept the promise." The journey hasn't been neat. Healing never is. There are scars on Jordan's body, on Kendra's conscience, even on my own heart from years of wondering if I should have acted sooner. But scars are proof we survived, not that we're broken. Every bruise documented, every tear shed, every truth spoken in that courtroom became bricks in the wall of protection we built around Jordan. I tell people in quiet strength meetings that family is not defined by blood alone, it is defined by action. Raymond was bound to Jordan by marriage, yet he used that bond as a weapon. I was bound by love, and I chose to turn that bond into a shield. The choice is always there: silence or courage, fear or truth. I chose truth even when my voice shook. And here's what I've learned, what I hope you carry with you. Love is not gentle words spoken over turkey dinners, not gifts wrapped under trees, not smiles for holiday photographs. Love is action. Love is a phone call at midnight when a child whispers they're scared. Love is stepping between harm and the helpless, no matter who disapproves. Love is evidence, persistence, and the refusal to let darkness write the story. Jordan is proof of that. He laughs again. He studies hard. He draws superheroes in his notebook now instead of punishments. And when he says he wants to grow up and help kids like him, I believe him. He will stand tall because someone finally stood for him. As for me, I'm not just a grandmother anymore. I'm a witness, an advocate, a reminder that it is never too late to choose action. Quiet strength grows each week, voices louder, stories braver. Together we are breaking the silence. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Pay attention. Ask questions. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't wait for someone else to step in, be the person who does. Because evidence may never blink, but neither does love when it's real. Now, I'll turn this to you, the ones listening across screens and miles. Have you ever been in a moment where you had to choose between silence and action? Did you ever feel the world doubted your voice yet? You spoke anyway. I would love to hear your stories in the comments. Your words might be the light someone else needs to find their courage. And if my story touched you, if it reminded you that truth matters, that children deserve protection, that silence must be broken, please subscribe to this channel. Share these stories. Each view, each comment, each subscription is not just a number, it is a ripple. Together we can turn ripples into waves. Waves strong enough to reach those still trapped in cold, silent nights. Wherever you're watching from, Boston, Dallas, Miami, even small towns whose names never make the news, know this. Your voice has power. Don't underestimate it. Don't bury it. Use it. Because at the end of the day, titles and legacies fade, but the measure of a life is simple. Did you protect those who could not protect themselves? I know my answer now, and I hope when the moment comes, yours will be the same.